The Machine, based on the quote, incredible story by Bert Kreischer. Now, this movie was an absolute treat for podcast fans everywhere. I know it definitely was for me. During a recent episode of this podcast, I told you guys about going to see Bert Kreischer live during the Fully Loaded comedy festival that he put together, specifically the Forest Hills, New York show. And I gave those of you who are the uninitiated a bit of a background on the whole Machine story, which I'm not going to rehash here, but I'd be remiss if I didn't share the original story in its entirety with you guys now. I think it really sets the stage well for my little recap and review of the movie, which I'll get to right after. And also, it's a great fucking story. The version of the story that I enjoy most, which I'll link to in the episode notes so you guys can actually watch it visually, is just the audio that was taken from Rogan's podcast like over 12 years ago when Bert originally told the story on his pod. And like I mentioned before, I was like listening to that story live when it happened. But someone took that story, the audio from that story, and created like this South Park-ish type animation that goes really well with it. So I'll link to that in the episode notes. It's from the Become My Minions YouTube page, if you guys want to check it out. But the story itself is about 9 minutes long. So if you've heard it before, don't want to hear it again, feel free to skip forward about 9 minutes and I'll continue with my little recap and review of the actual movie itself. And those of you who haven't heard the story yet, you're in for an absolute treat. So here you go.
So listen, man, last time you were here, there's a fucking story about the Russian mob. We tease these bitches. we let these people right now on Twitter, they have been going crazy all day. Do not let Bert Kreischer get out of there without the Russian mob story, man. Okay. So tell us what the fuck happened.
All right. This is in 1993, probably, I think, is when I went to Russia. I was taking Russian classes at Florida State. I thought they were Spanish classes. Because I thought they were Spanish classes because it was a noon class and I signed up and then I was like, fucking sweet, Spanish at noon? I could phone that in. And then I get there and they start writing in a new language, a new alphabet. And I'm like, all right, this clearly isn't Spanish. So then I said, I'm going to leave. And the teacher's like, listen, don't leave because if you leave, we can't have a class and I can't get my master's degree. But if you stick around, I'll talk to you after the class. I get done the end of the class. She's like, listen, don't... if you don't leave and just show up at class, I'll give you a C. I was like, done. So I took Russian. I took Russian 1, 2, and 3 because these kids needed another guy in their class to take these classes. So then finally I take Russian 4 and we go to Russia. But this is Russia like when the mob ran Russia. Like, are you guys aware of that?
No.
Okay, in like the late 90s, mid 90s, the mob ran everything that had to do with Russia. So when going over to Russia, you had to literally pay off the mob in order to go and study abroad. So we paid off the mob, and they gave us in return 2 banditos, 2 young mobsters who would go everywhere with us. They lived in our hotel. They stayed with us. They went on tours with us. They did everything with us. Their names were Igor and Sasha. And when we got there, our teacher was like, listen, this is Igor and Sasha. They will be ghosting us. With my teacher, who was there with me, was like, they're in the fucking mob.
Igor and Sasha. It's like a gay guy named Bruce.
And they were oh, it gets worse. So they're like, listen, whatever you do to our class, do not talk to them. Do not interact with them.
Oh my God.
Do not engage them. They are only here to shadow us. So in my head, I'm like, fucking get to know these guys, right? Like, get a bottle of vodka, 6-pack of Baltica, knock on their door. Now, mind you, I speak no Russian at the time. No Russian, because I'd never studied in any of the classes. So, first night there, I knock on Igor and Sasha's room, and they're having a party in there. Like, fucking all their friends are in their room. They lived right next to me, and Kendra, my teacher, lived across the hall from Igor. So I knock on their door. Igor opens the door, and he looks like a fucking thug. He's got like a wife beater on, a cigarette, a beer, and he just looks at me in Russian and just goes, "Что?" And now, the second he says that, I start panicking. All the phrases I had in my head that I was trying to say all disappear, and all I say to Igor in Russian is, "I am the machine."
What is it? How do you say that?
Ya machinu. And so, but I just said, "Ya machinu," and he went, "Huh? Что?" And now I don't know what I've said. I'm like, what did I just say? I'll fuck you up? Like, and I go, "I am the machine." And he goes, say it again. I said, I'm the machine. And then he starts laughing and he brings me into the room. He's like, hold on, say it again. And so I say it to the room. I don't know what the fuck I'm saying. I'm like, I'm the machine. And they're like, you're the machine. I'm like, I'm the machine. I said that all fucking night with these guys. That's the only communication we had is I said, I'm the machine. And Igor and Sasha and I became best friends, right? We did everything together. If we went on a field trip, they would tell me, machine, you don't need to go on the field trips. Come drink with us. So now, cut to one day we have to take a train to Moscow. Now a different mob ran the train to Moscow and a different mob ran Moscow. And Igor and Sasha were not allowed to cross boundaries. And they told me, they said, listen, we're not going to go with you, but we've taken care of you. We've talked to the mobsters on the train and in Moscow. Because we had to pay them too. They had to follow our
they
class.
weren't allowed to come with you.
They weren't allowed to come with us.
Because it's a different mob.
And we're paying a different mob now to protect us on the train. Wow. We're paying a different mob to protect us in Moscow.
Holy shit.
So they said, we've taken care of it, don't worry about it. So they take me to the train, and they introduced me to our two new gangsters, Igor and Igor. And
what? Double Igors.
I swear to you.
3 Igors out of 4 dudes.
Igor and Igor. There's not a lot of names in Russia. It's Alex, Igor, or Sasha.
What about Fyodor?
So Igor and Igor's... My Igor says to these Igors, this is the machine. If you give him alcohol, you'll have a great time. So Igor and Igor are like through the roof. They're like, awesome. Don't worry. We've taken care of you. We're sitting in first class. You're not sitting with your class. You're sitting in first class to Moscow. And I'm like, holy shit, this is what I'm talking about. And I bring another guy, John Bolshoi, Big John. I bring him with me to go sit in first class. And sure enough, man, we're in fucking first class. Just me, these two Igors, John, the conductor, I shit you not, the conductor, before the train takes off, comes into the room, I swear to you, rips off the band on his thing, says, this is a present for the machine. It would be an honor to do a shot with you. And I'm like, oh, this is fucking right. So I do a shot with the conductor, and we pound this vodka within like fucking 30, 45 minutes. We're done all the vodka in the room.
Whoa.
We're drinking hard. And my class is all on coach, and I'm sitting in first class. And Igor and Igor are like, let's go get more vodka. And I'm like, done. These guys run the fucking train. So we get up, we walk into the bar cart, and Big Igor says, machine, grab a bottle of, grab some bread, Kleb. And I'm like, that's bread. I'm understanding Russian. He's like, grab some siev, that's cheese. I'm like, I'm learning Russian. I'm looking at John who's standing behind me. He's like, yeah. He's like, grab vodka. I go, I know that one. And he's like, grab all the money. Grab all the rubles. And I go, what? I look around and we're robbing the bar cart.
What?
The bartender's standing like this. Everyone's standing against the wall. And I'm sitting behind the bar with a handful of rubles, a bottle of vodka, and a thing of bread going, holy fuck. John looks at me and he's like, just take it. Let's go. Take all the fucking cash out of the bar cart.
And what is the bartender doing?
Not making eye contact. And they're passing
Everyone just lets it happen.
It's the mob. They ran everything in Russia. Everything.
Wow.
And so we get done and we go back to our room and it's a totally different energy. Very sketchy, you know? And
Are you freaked out now?
I'm freaked out because I'm like, fuck, I just robbed the car. Like, no one else saw anyone rob the bar car except for me. And my teacher, Val, who's at the time was our chaperone, didn't speak any Russian. She comes to our first class cart, opens the door, and says, I need to talk to you right now. And I was like, listen. And she goes, I told you that you're in big trouble. Your classmates have told me what happened. Big Igor takes a sip of vodka, spits it in her eyes, and goes, no one talks to the machine like that. I'm like,
whoa, he spit vodka in her eyes?
And fucking it is. And then shuts the door and then looks at me and he says, don't worry, I got you. When it gets dark, we're going to have a lot of fun. And he pulls out a thing of keys. He's got keys to the whole fucking train. He's like, we're going to rob everyone when it gets dark. Now I'm like, fuck, what did I get myself into?
God.
Like, this is bad news. Bad fucking news. So it gets dark, and sure enough, then we start robbing the train. Go through my class first, and we fucking open the door. Little Igor would crawl in, pull the bags out. John and I would go through them and try not to steal, like, anything important. And Big Igor would stand guard, and if anyone woke up, he'd take a sip of vodka and spit it in their face.
What?
And it was, I mean, it's sketchy. Now it's sketchy. It's not even fun.
Are these guys armed?
No. They're loaded, though. They're hammered, pissed drunk. We robbed my whole class, and then they end up taking off and going into the car, and me and John are sitting in the first class car just thinking, we're fucked, man, we're fucked. We robbed the train, we've robbed the bar cart, and they come back and they're just fucking angry drunk, like pissed angry drunk. We pull into Moscow, and my teacher Val comes to the door, opens it, and said, I'm just letting you know we've called the police. So I was like, fuck. So Igor and Igor are like, fuck it, don't worry, fuck the police, this is Russia. Who the fuck does she think she is? This isn't America, this is Russia. We run everything. I'm like, ugh, I'm gonna fucking go to the gulag. Sure enough, man, the cops are sitting on the middle, like, the middle, where people get off the train, that little receiving area. My class is sitting there. My whole class are in the pajamas. They're crying. Their bags have been gone through. They're fucking giving statements to the cops, and the cops are writing them down. And I'm sitting with Igor and John in the fucking cart, and they're just still drinking and smoking. And they're like, fuck this, we'll take care of this right now. They walk outside, out to the cops, and start yelling at the cops. And I'm like, motherfucker, this is not how I would have taken care of this. Just, I don't even know what they're saying, but they're just shouting, and the cops are shouting back. And then finally Big Igor just starts pointing at me. And I'm like, oh, he's pinning this whole fucking thing on me? Like, I'm going down for the whole thing? And then the cop starts pointing at me and telling me, Zidis, paydiom, or whatever he's saying. Come here, right now. So I fucking walk out, and it's that moment where you find the hash on your body. They find it, and you're going to jail forever. That's that moment, that walk, where your asshole gets cold, and you're like, this is it.
Midnight Express.
Fucking, that's the moment. And I walk all the way across this little fucking trail to get to him. I get right up to the cop, and the cop looks at me, and he goes, I understand you're the machine. I was like, yeah. And he goes, tonight you party with us. I was like,
what?
All right. So then we went out and partied with these cops.
So the cops did nothing.
Fucking nothing. They were so excited to meet the machine.
How great is that story? It's like it has so many different elements within it. Bert claims it's true. It's something that actually happened to him back in college. Certain aspects of it are exaggerated for comedic effect, as comedians do. What I personally appreciate most from it, from a storytelling perspective, is all the different elements within it. The ups and the downs, like rooting for him at certain points. You think he's a piece of shit at other points. You get invested in what's going to happen. It's suspenseful. It's funny, obviously. It has like so much going on. It's potent. It's rich in story, if that makes any sense. It does to me. Hopefully it does to you guys. But what's really dope also is just the arc of someone telling a story on a podcast that was not yet and very far from being the largest platform on the planet. So it didn't even have that like Rogan effect yet. But a relatively unknown comic telling a story on a podcast. Him being encouraged to tell that story on stage. And then true comedy and podcast fans, when Bert is on stage, pushing him to actually tell the story, to develop it, to try it. Bert giving in and doing it. And then that story, along with his work ethic, talent, marketing genius, which he definitely has, catapulting him into a headlining top-tier comic and podcaster, who's then able to parlay that story into a feature film. Just that story idea, that story, that rich story, parlaying that into a feature film, wide release worldwide in movie theaters, and doing that piece of it on the side to a financial loss to himself because of how popular the podcasts and comedy touring have become. Doing a movie like that actually takes away from you financially. But just the arc of that story, going from that initial 9-minute or so nugget on an obscure internet radio show called the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, winding up where it is today, is just fucking amazing. I love that. Definitely a round of applause for that. Just for the power of podcasts. Now, the movie for me, and take this with a grain of salt because I definitely am biased, being such a big podcast fan, definitely did not disappoint. And I will get into the financials of the movie towards the end of this little recap and review. But first, let's start off with the official synopsis. Bert's drunken past catches up with him 20 years down the road when he and his father are kidnapped by those Bert wronged 20 years ago while drunk on a college semester abroad in Russia. And as we always do here on the Spun Today Podcast, I want to give a special shout out to the writers that make it all possible. And by all, I mean all. Every form of media that you read or see. The movie was written by Bert Kreischer, based on his story. And the screenplay written by Kevin Beagle and Scotty Landis. Shout out to Bert Kreischer, Kevin Beagle, and Scotty Landis. Now, something I think that the movie did really well, that I enjoyed, were the flashback scenes. And how in the flashback scenes throughout the movie, they sprinkle in showing different aspects of that machine story that I just played for you guys. You know, like going to Russia, knocking on the door of the banditis that were assigned to them in the hotel room, and then partying with them, and then the different train scenes that he goes through, and like robbing the train, so on and so forth. Because the movie starts off, you know, like modern day Bert playing pretty much himself, a accomplished stand-up comedian and podcaster. He has a couple daughters, as he does in real life, and their family is throwing his daughter a birthday party. It's an outdoor birthday party / pool party. A lot of people around. Leanne, Bert's actual wife in real life, makes a cameo in the movie as like a single mom or something that Bert hates and like makes fun of. But during this party, the daughter of a Russian mobster kingpin corners and confronts Bert after they see Bert on TV, on Netflix, I believe, telling this machine story. And the father, the Russian kingpin guy, puts two and two together and remembers a time when he was a young businessman traveling on a train when he got robbed, and one of the things they stole from him was a family heirloom. And that's what apparently set him off into a life of crime. Now he's a lot older, and his children, now the daughter and a couple of brothers, you know, want to avenge that for his father. So they track down Bert. They wind up kidnapping Bert because he obviously doesn't remember, you know, who he stole what from, because it was, you know, he was drunk and it was at the pretty much gunpoint of the Russian mobsters that were telling him to steal shit. So they decide to just kidnap him to take him back to Russia to help retrace his steps from 20 years back and figure out where the fuck this family heirloom watch thing is. And they kidnap Bert as well as his father, who's played by Mark Hamill, aka the original Luke Skywalker, which is pretty cool. So they do that, and in taking Bert back and him having to retrace his steps, he's like retelling the story as they get to Russia and saying, okay, this is where the dorms were. Oh yeah, I remember this party that was going on, blah, 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 blah. And then they flash back to a young Bert played by Jimmy Tatro, which did an amazing job, as Bert is like retelling the story. And then they show those like flashback scenes. So I think that they executed excellently. And for those of us who are, you know, fans of the Machine Story, or of podcasts rather, and know the Machine Story so well, it's like an extra treat because like that story just became over the decade plus just like podcast folklore, podcast legend, you know? And to see it on the screen and see aspects of the story executed the way they were, it was kind of like little Easter eggs throughout it. And you anticipate certain things like, oh yeah, this is the part where he's gonna like spit the vodka, so on and so forth, which just made the experience that much more satisfying. And that's pretty much the premise of the movie. Like the deeper he gets into the Machine Story itself, you know, the more and more it like flashes back, it shows you everything. Then it goes back to current times and you see them go to, for example, the room where the gangsters used to like party and stuff. And Bert said there was like a safe in a wall, so they like break a wall and they look for stuff in there. They find like where the stash was, but the watch itself wasn't there, so that was a dead end. And then they continue to retrace steps. They go on the train, which reminds me of, they were like really funny one-liners throughout that seemed, at least to me, like ad-libbed, which wouldn't be surprising, you know, coming from an actual comic, where like a scene in particular on the train, for example, there were like these Russian mobsters that looked like goth guys kind of mixed with something else. And Bert's like, they look like they're fucking cosplaying American History X. And that was just like a funny reference. And they actually really did. And the action, by the way, was pretty fucking good. There was a scene, an elaborate like fighting, shooting scene. There was a couple of them. One towards the beginning and one towards the end that stand out the most to me. But the one in the beginning at the condos, which are now condos, but back then that's where like the dorm was for the students. There was a fight scene and shooting scene that broke out. And Bert and his dad are pretty much being chaperoned by the daughter of this mobster guy and her like little crew of thugs. And then the brother comes with his crew and they're trying to like take Bert and Bert's father because they want to be the ones that secure this family heirloom for the father, right? So like they're in like internal family strife competition shit. So you have kind of like this competing faction of mob members going at it. And there's a scene, if you can picture, they're like going down in an elevator. You know, there's a lot of fighting going on. The daughter's like, and it's like John Wick style, like shooting, and you see blood splatter and fucking flipping people, breaking their arms, cracking their necks. And Bert and his father are like ducking and screaming and scared. And there's one point where they go down in the elevator and then they're in the lobby and there's like a shootout going on in the lobby, and a guy that has them at gunpoint gets shot and drops, and his gun is there. And then the bad guys that are looking to like take Bert and his father, and they start shooting at Bert and his father, and they're like stuck in the elevator. And Bert like just like grabs the gun out of instinct. He's like, I'm gonna shoot him in the leg. I'm gonna shoot him in the leg. And his father's like, do it. And he's like, I'm just gonna shoot him in the leg. And he shoots, and the bullet winds up like ricocheting. It winds up hitting the guy in the head, kills him instantly. It like ricochets in the lobby, and hilariously like kills 2 other people. So it's like that one bullet that he intended to shoot the guy in the leg winds up killing 3 people somehow. Like some magic bullet shit. So it was like really good action scenes like that, mixed with comedy, obviously, because that's like the backbone of the movie is comedy, right? And there's this hilariously gross, disgusting scene where it's just like a funny concept and looked funny, and it's essentially they're on the train and like this other fight breaks out, and Irina, played by Eva Babic, which is the daughter of the gangster kingpin guy, she comes up behind the guy that's confronting either Bert or Bert's father and just slits his throat. And it's like, holy fuck. But the guy's like this brolic dude, and he like keeps coming, and Bert winds up throwing a punch, like to punch the guy in the face, but winds up punching him in the throat. But since she slit his throat, his fist gets stuck inside his throat. It was so fucking gross, but it's like you can picture it happening given the circumstances. And then his hand is stuck and he's trying to get it out. Then the guy falls on top of him, and then it was just fucking gross. I think he starts throwing up, and it was fucking great. Gross and great at the same time. Really good scene. Speaking of gross, there's one that's in the trailer that's really funny, where he's trying to take a piece of wood or something that's went through Irina's leg. Bert is trying to get it out for her and like pull it out, and she's like screaming in agony, and there's like blood everywhere, and he winds up like dry heaving, and she's like, don't throw up or I'm gonna throw up, don't throw up or I'm gonna throw up. And he's like, I'm not gonna throw up. And she's like, don't throw up, I'm gonna throw up. And then he just like throws up, and then but like into his hand. and then he just puts the throw up in his jacket pocket. And then she's like, did you just put it in your fucking pocket? And he's like, I don't know where to put it. Really fucking funny. And in the actual movie, in that scene, they're like in this village, because he reunited with one of the old banditis from back in the day, Igor, who had since left the life. And they're like in this little self-sustaining village in Russia, and a lot of the people know who Bert is. And Igor's like, how do they know me? Bert asks Igor, like, how do they know me? He's like, oh, they listen to your podcast. So shout out to podcast. I thought that was a very cool, dope moment. I do say so myself. And I love this heart-to-heart moment that Irina and Bert have, when Bert is telling her about his need to like balance the machine character that he built up to this party animal machine guy and the real Bert, and how he felt that he had to like kill off the machine and like stop playing into it and stuff like that, just so he can be Bert again. And she interestingly compared that to Steve Urkel on Family Matters, and how Steve Urkel created Stefan Urkel, and then at one point had to choose between either Stefan Urkel or just Steve Urkel. And when he chose Stefan Urkel, he kind of went bad. He went dark. He was like a bad version of Stefan Urkel, because it killed off like all the good aspects of him, the Steve Urkel aspects of him. And when he was just Steve, he also felt dissatisfied. So ultimately he wound up cloning himself and created the good Stefan Urkel version and the Steve Urkel version, and there was like a balance there. And she likened that to her own life and being a mobster and stuff like that. But she tells him this line, which I thought was pretty dope and definitely has some truth to it and could apply to other aspects of life. And I love finding things like that in unlikely places, like this comedy movie basically having like a life lesson within it, which if you're open to it, I think you can always find in things in different unlikely areas. But she tells him, quote, "We don't grow by destroying parts of ourselves. We grow by finding balance between the parts." And if you guys listen to this podcast long enough, you know that I am all about striving, at least, for balance in most things. So that right there definitely resonated with me. And lastly, I'll say about the movie that I really liked the cinematography of it. Like the way it looked, just looked great. It looked really, really good. Like I don't know anything about cinematography aside from saying the word cinematography and making it sound like I know what the fuck I'm talking about. But that to me just means like visually how something looks on the screen, and like the angles they take with the camera, the tint or the hue of it, like that type of stuff was just visually satisfying to me. So kudos to them on that. Now let's talk finances, because one of the biggest criticisms of this movie is how it was a box office flop. The budget for it was around 20 million, and to date it's made worldwide about 10.6 million. So it's made about 50% of its money back while it was in theaters. Now apparently the online or like streaming sales, because you could rent it or you can stream it or buy it now, like through Amazon, for example. Those sales are doing really well, but those numbers I don't have. So it's more hearsay, although that is how I saw the movie. And the only reason why, which I wound up buying it, not renting it, via Amazon. But the only reason why I didn't see it in theaters is because my particular theater that I go to wasn't showing the movie, which was definitely a letdown because I did want to support it in the theater. And I even searched like a couple of other theaters that around the way that aren't particularly the theater that I always go to, but that I have gone to, and I was like, fuck it, just to support, I'll go there, even though it's a less of a good experience at some of the other theaters, but they weren't there either. And that's the bone that I have to pick with, I guess it's more so with like Sony Pictures and whatever goes into like that side of the decision making of how wide of a release it is, because the movie came out in 2,409 theaters. Now, for comparison, a movie like the Super Mario Brothers movie was in 3,148 theaters. Fast X is in 4,088 theaters. The Little Mermaid, 4,320 theaters. Those are huge movies, obviously. So not really an apples to apples comparison, but something that's much closer, pretty much the same. About My Father, which is Sebastian Maniscalco's movie, which I definitely want to see and support. That one was in 2,464 theaters. So I feel like if it had a wider release, it would have done even better. At least I know that's true in my case. But would it have done better by 50%? That I'm not so sure. But I did find it interesting based on just looking at the numbers and correlations purely based on my speculation that I can make. When movies are released, like The Machine was released in, like I said, 2,409 theaters. That's like opening weekend. And it's probably that for like a week or so. But then the number of theaters start dwindling down that it's in. So it becomes less and less available to see, right? But its first day coming out, it made 2.2 million first day. The first opening weekend, it made 5 million. So it's in those 2,409 theaters. It made 5 million, which is literally 50% of everything that it's made. It made within the first couple days. So I just wonder if it would have sustained the number of theaters that it was in and maybe increased that to make it a little bit more accessible, how much more box office success it would have had. But I don't know. I just really enjoyed the movie, and I want to see more movies like this get made. I want to see more investment from studios into these kind of movies, which from a business perspective won't be a financially sound decision, right? If they put $20 million into something and make, $10-11 million back, that's just bad business. However, selfishly, as a comedy fan, as a fan of like the Hangover movies, Superbad, the like real funny rated R comedies, I want more of that. And we're in a unique moment in time where we have this explosion stemming from the podcast space of top tier comedians that can make it happen. I want them to have the opportunity to translate their comedic abilities to the screen. I want to see I know in Bert and Tom Segura have spoken about this like Fat Astronauts movie or something like that they that they pitched, that they're trying to get made. They mentioned it on the podcast, Two Bears podcast. And we have the Sebastian movie. I want to see a movie about Theo Von. I know he wants to make something. Fluffy Gabriel Iglesias had a sitcom. I want to see like more of that. Sebastian's movie that I mentioned earlier. Joe List and Louis C.K. made a movie, and it wasn't even a comedy, and it was fucking excellent. 4th of July. I broke it down on the pod, And I guess my advice, for what it's worth, which probably not much, to the studios, is to invest in building up the appetite for these comedy movies, because the appetite is there, but the inventory isn't. You know, so it's like having the appetite for something, but not knowing that what is able to satisfy and quench that appetite, not knowing that exists or that it's there, is the issue. And I know a lot of people blame like the Avengers movies and stuff like that for like fucking up the industry, which I don't necessarily agree with. Like me personally, I enjoy the fuck out of those movies, but I also want movies like this as well. I think they can all exist. But from a studio perspective, if, you know, they put 100 million, 200 million into making a John Wick and, you know, then make 500 million back, like that's smart business, you know, so they're gonna tend to go in that direction. But I feel like that superhero genre, like they did, whether advertently or inadvertently, feed and create that appetite for that type of movie. You know, we had a ton of X-Men movies, Spider-Man movies, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, you know, Batman's every couple of years, Superman movies, etc., etc. Only back in the day in the 90s, 2000s. And they weren't these like grand slam, immediate juggernaut behemoth movies that started coming after you had like the first Iron Man movie and parlaying that into the Avengers and all the spin-off Avenger movies and then the TV shows, etc. Like you had to go through that time period of those initial superhero movies that did okay, maybe not great. And I think there is this unique opportunity now within the comedy space and podcasting and these headlining genius comics that are willing to point that comedic creativity towards filmmaking to have a resurgence and golden age of dope comedy films. But until we get there, I'll definitely appreciate movies like The Machine, and it's gonna be one of those that I rewatch just to see what like podcast and or The Machine story itself, like Easter eggs that I find throughout it, like during like a second and subsequent viewings. But shout out again to Bert Kreischer for making it happen. The Machine, available now on Amazon.